couple of weeks and then into the first part of the new year. Next week, because of the coming holiday, we will not be here on Wednesday night. And then the next week is December the 3rd, believe it or not. 2 weeks from tonight, December the 3rd. And we will, that'll be our last night for this session. I know originally we were scheduled to go one more week, but that gets in the middle of Christmas project setup and all that kind of stuff. And so we're gonna wrap up that night. We'll do the last two Psalms that night. They're short. I think that'll be fine to do, and we'll do that then. So then we'll be wrapped up for our study. The 10th then is Christmas project setup, and then the 17th is our longest night service, which happens over in the sanctuary. And then the next Wednesday after that is Christmas Eve. So it is coming quickly. As we start into the new year, I want to talk to you a little bit about plans for that. We'll start back on January the 7th. That's the first Wednesday after school gets started back and all that with the school year. And our theme in worship and study next year is the way of Jesus. And for instance, on Sunday mornings during Epiphany, we'll be talking about the way that Jesus taught us to pray. And those sermons will all be about the Lord's Prayer. We'll be working through that. So on Wednesday evenings, we're going to talk about the heartbeat of Jesus. And I think the best place we find the heartbeat of Jesus is in the Sermon on the Mount. So we'll spend winter and probably most of the spring just kind of taking a very deliberate walk through the Sermon on the Mount together, and that'll be our focus during that time. We are, however, going to try something new in January, scheduling-wise, in that we're going to add an additional Bible study opportunity. Much like we do early worship and late worship on Sunday, we're going to do early Bible study and late Bible study on Wednesday. And so we're going to offer Bible study at 4 o'clock on Wednesday afternoons beginning in January. And that session's going to meet in the fireside room. It won't be streamed. It'll be the same study, both sessions. But we kind of looked at it, and we have a lot of folks from the choir who miss Bible study, and they want to be a part of that. And so we're going to do that to give them an opportunity to be a part. But we also know for some folks, driving at night's a problem, being out late's a problem. And so that allows folks to come in a little bit earlier and do that. So it'll be 4 o'clock, Bible study, dinner still at 5:15, other things start at 6. So we'll still have this time as we always do. But I just wanted you to be aware there'll be a couple of options beginning in January, trying to make that available to a few more folks, make it a little bit more convenient maybe for some people. So just wanted to kind of give you the heads up on that. You'll start to see announcements about that pretty soon, but wanted you to know that. Okay, so with all of that now announced, let's switch over to our scripture for tonight, which is Psalm 132. And as we've done throughout this process, I'm going to read it for you 3 times. We're going to, the first time, just invite you to listen. Just listen to what it says. Let the words kind of sink in, wash over, and begin to get them in your ear. And so here's what the psalm says. Lord, remember David in all his self-denial. He swore an oath to the Lord. He made a vow to the Mighty One of Jacob. I will not enter my house or go to my bed. I will allow no sleep to my eyes or slumber to my eyelids till I find a place for the Lord, a dwelling for the Mighty One of Jacob. We heard it in Ephrathah. We came upon it in the fields of Jaar. Let us go to his dwelling place. Let us worship at his footstool, saying, Arise, Lord, and come to your resting place, you and the ark of your might. May your priest be clothed with your righteousness. May your faithful people sing for joy. For the sake of your servant David, do not reject your anointed one. The Lord swore an oath to David, a sure oath he will not revoke. One of your own descendants I will place on your throne. If your sons keep my covenant and the statutes I teach them, then their sons will sit on your throne forever and ever. For the Lord has chosen Zion. He has destined it for his dwelling, saying, This is my resting place forever and ever. Here I will sit enthroned, for I have desired it. I will bless her with abundant provisions. Her poor I will satisfy with food. I will clothe her priests with salvation, and her faithful people will ever sing for joy. Here I will make a horn grove for David and set up a lamp for my anointed one. I will clothe his enemies with shame, but his head will be adorned with a radiant crown. So as I read it again, I want you to listen for echoes of obedience. When Peterson talks about this psalm, he says he thinks it's about obedience. I want you to listen for echoes of obedience. Lord, remember David in all his self-denial. He swore an oath to the Lord. He made a vow to the mighty one of Jacob. I will not enter my house or go to my bed. I will allow no sleep to my eyes or slumber to my eyelids till I find a place for the Lord, a dwelling for the mighty one of Jacob. We heard it in Ephrathah. We came upon it in the fields of Jaar. Let us go to his dwelling place. Let us worship at his footstool, saying, Arise, Lord, and come to your resting place, you and the ark of your might. May your priests be clothed with your righteousness. May your faithful people sing for joy. For the sake of your servant David, do not reject your anointed one. The Lord swore an oath to David, a sure oath he will not revoke. One of your own descendants I will place on your throne. If your sons keep my covenant and the statutes I teach them, then their sons will sit on your throne forever and ever. For the Lord has chosen Zion. He has desired it for his dwelling, saying, This is my resting place forever and ever. Here I will sit enthroned, for I have desired it. I will bless her with abundant provisions. Her poor I will satisfy with food. I will clothe her priest with salvation, and her faithful people will ever sing for joy. Here I will make a horn grove for David, and set up a lamp for my anointed one. I will clothe his enemies with shame, but his head will be adorned with a radiant crown. Take a minute, share with folks around your table, what echoes of obedience do you hear there? What do you hear in that psalm that maybe speaks to obedience? So what do you hear in this psalm that seems to be about obedience, or maybe points to obedience? Jean? Okay, there's a conditional phrase there in the middle. If your sons stay true to the promise, if they keep the statutes that I've taught them, if they live the way I want them to live, then I will. Okay? What else? Let us worship. Okay? Mm-hmm. David made a vow to do something specific. Yep. Okay? I want to read it again. And this time, see if you can kind of think of what the history of this psalm might be. What historical event it might be pointing back to. Lord, remember David in all his self-denial. He swore an oath to the Lord. He made a vow to the Mighty One of Jacob. I will not enter my house or go to my bed. I will allow no sleep to my eyes or slumber to my eyelids till I find a place for the Lord, a dwelling for the Mighty One of Jacob. We heard it in Ephrathah. We came upon it in the fields of Jaar. Let us go to his dwelling place. Let us worship at his footstool, saying, Arise, Lord, and come to your resting place, you and the ark of your might. May your priests be clothed with your righteousness. May your faithful people sing for joy. For the sake of your servant David, do not reject your anointed one. The Lord swore an oath to David, a sure oath he will not revoke. One of your own descendants I will place on your throne. If your sons keep my covenant and the statutes I teach them, then their sons will sit on your throne forever and ever. For the Lord has chosen Zion. He has desired it for his dwelling, saying, This is my resting place forever and ever. Here I will sit enthroned, for I have desired it. I will bless her with abundant provisions. Her poor I will satisfy with food. I will clothe her priests with salvation, and her faithful people will ever sing for joy. Here I will make a horn grow for David and set up a lamp for my anointed one. I will clothe his enemies with shame, but his head will be adorned with a radiant crown. Can you place that historically in context? Do you know what the psalm is pointing backward to at this point? Sounds like the temple. It's before that, though. Nancy? He's talking about when David brought back the Ark of the Covenant. So if you don't remember that story, the quick version is, and you find the original story in 1 Samuel, mostly chapters 4 through 6. But you may remember that the Ark of the Covenant was entrusted to Eli and Eli's good-for-nothing sons. You may remember them, Hophni and Phinehas. And so they had gotten a particularly bad beating from the Philistines, and God told them not to fight, told them not to do it. They decided they were going to do it again anyway, and they decided that they would take the Ark of the Covenant with them into battle. Now, as a side note, one moral of the story is we don't have God in a box to take with us wherever we want to as a talisman for whatever we weren't supposed to do to start with. Okay? This one moral of that story is don't carry God in your pocket thinking that's going to solve all your problems for you, especially if you're trying to do something God already told you not to do. So the battle doesn't go well, and the Philistines capture the ark, and they take it back with them. But a strange thing happens. Everywhere they take that ark, calamity befalls the city. Everywhere they have it, terrible things happen. And after about 7 months, some bright guy says, you know what? Maybe we ought to give this thing back. So they decide to do that. So they put it on a new cart with new oxen, and they send it back. And they send with it, and this is my favorite part, they make golden images of all the horrible things that happened to them while they had the ark. And they send that back with the ark. So the ark comes back, and they, at first, they take it to a place called Bet Shemesh, and they have this huge party. They celebrate that the ark has come home. And then some of the good old boys there in Bet Shemesh decide, we're going to look inside that and see what's in there. Well, you're not supposed to do that. I don't know if y'all know that, but if you've seen Indiana Jones and Raiders of the Lost Ark, you know you're not supposed to look in the ark. And they look in the ark, and they die. And so suddenly, the folks in Bet Shemesh think, well, maybe we shouldn't keep this here, because after all, look at all these things that happened to these other people, and these fellows just dropped dead. And so it winds up in Kiryat Jearim, in somebody's barn, basically. Like your great-grandpa's truck that just got parked in the barn and left, that's where the ark is. And it's overlooked. It's basically forgotten during the reign of Saul. Well, when David comes to the throne and he becomes king, he makes an oath to the Lord, I'm bringing the Lord back. I'm bringing the Ark of the Covenant into Jerusalem. Now, theologically, this is David's way of saying, I'm bringing the presence of God back to where it should be in the center of the kingdom. And because for Israel, the Ark of the Covenant equaled the presence of God. So, for theologically, but you can imagine politically, David, who's just establishing his new capital in Jerusalem, having the Ark of the Covenant there kind of helps lock that down, right? So David says, I'm going to bring the Lord back to his rightful place. I'm going to bring him back to the mountain of Zion, to where God should be. And so they go out and they get the ark. And so he goes up to Kiryat Jearim, and they put the ark again on a new cart with new oxen, and they head off. And everything's going okay until they hit a rut. And the ark starts to slide off the cart, and this poor fella named Uzzam, who's walking next to the cart, instinctually thinks to himself, as any one of you would, it's probably not a good idea if the ark falls off the cart onto the ground. He puts his hand on it to hold it, and he drops dead. Which I don't know, I struggle with the fairness of that. I feel like he's doing his best, but you're not supposed to touch the ark. That's the idea. So the parade to Jerusalem stops because they start thinking, this thing is kind of dangerous. I don't know if we need to take it back. And they contemplate that for a while. But the impulse and David's idea of he's made this oath to God, being obedient to this oath to God, they bring it on in. And you may remember there's a parade in Jerusalem, and David dances before the ark as they bring the ark back in Jerusalem. As Peterson says, this psalm has a history. This psalm is recalling those events. And as such, it's one of the older psalms in the Psalter because it points back to that. But it gets included in this because it becomes a song that the pilgrims sing on their way to worship. Now, they know this story. They know what happened. And they're singing this song about how wonderful it was when we heard what David was doing. You know, that's the middle part of that psalm where they say, we heard in Ephrathah, which is Bethlehem, basically. It's not anywhere near where the ark was. This is the other end of the province. This is down in the south of Judea. When we heard down there, when we heard in Jaar, wherever we were, when we heard what David was, we came to worship God who was back in God's rightful place. And so that's the nature of the psalm, what it's saying. But my question to you is, why are you singing that song on the way up to worship at the festival? What do you think that's about? Why is it important to recall that story as they go up to worship? So far, it's very insightful what you have to offer. All right, I'll let you off the hook. I think there are a couple things here. One is it's a reminder that they are entering into God's presence. And that God intended to be where God is in the temple. That if you look toward the end of that, for the Lord has chosen Zion, he has desired it for his dwelling. In other words, this is where God was meant to be, and the faithful helped to get God where God was supposed to be, if you think about it in those terms. And so there's something about this is why we're going where we're going. It's a reminder of why we're going to this place. It reminds me of, what you do sometimes with children and grandchildren when you take them to a specific place that you want them to have a connection to, and you're telling them, this is why we go here. We go here because this is where your grandmother grew up, or we go here because this is what happened here. Or, when you're taking a friend someplace to show them, oh yeah, this is where we won the state championship, or whatever it is. That place that reminds you of something else. And so they're reminding each other of why they're going where they're going. But I think there's something else here, and Peterson picks up on this, because he says obedience has a history. We walk well-worn paths as disciples. The paths that we walk following Jesus in life, other people have walked. And so singing the song of what David did reminded the faithful in their day of what their promises to God are and the way they should be at work to fulfill those promises as well. And Peterson says it helps us in our faithfulness to understand that we are walking a path others have walked, and so we have more information at hand than we have from just our own experience. Barb? It is a lot like that. Right. And so if you didn't hear what Barb said, she said it's kind of like our last year, our 150th celebration here at Calvary. We look back, we see how other people walked the path, and we learn from that. And sometimes, in really funny ways, we see that we're walking the same path over and over again sometimes. Sometimes it's like, oh yeah, they tried that then, and then they tried it again here, and then they tried it again here, and we think we're doing something new, and it's actually been done 15 times, in the past, whatever it is. Here's kind of what Peterson says about that. I find this helpful. He starts out with an example, but then he gets in this idea of how memory shapes our obedience. He says, history is important, for without it, we're at the mercy of whims. Memory is a data bank we use to evaluate our position and make decisions. With a biblical memory, we have 2,000 years of experience from which to make the off-the-cuff responses that are required each day in the life of faith. If we're going to live adequately and maturely as the people of God, we need more data to work from than our own experience can give us. He goes on to say that Christians accept as the final truth many much more important matters such as answered prayer, God's judgment, Christ's forgiveness, eternal salvation. But it wouldn't do that if the only person they could consult is themselves, and the only experience they evaluate is the most recent 10 minutes. But we need other experiences, the community of experience from brothers and sisters in the church, the centuries of experience provided by our biblical ancestors, a Christian who has David in his bones, Jeremiah in his bloodstream, Paul in his fingertips, and Christ in his heart will know how much and how little value to put on his own momentary feelings and the experience of the past week. That's a really interesting way to think about how we approach discipleship, that memory can be forming for us. It's not just reflection. We talk a lot about, we remember things and we reflect on them and we see God's blessing in them. We see God's goodness in the past. And sometimes that's the way we talk about memory and its function. It's to help us be grateful. But Peterson's saying here that what they're actually doing in this psalm is they're using the memory of this moment in Israel's history to shape how they live in that moment. And so we have available to us the biblical story, the story of the church universal, the story of this church, the faithful stories of our friends to help us when we're trying to formulate our own response to something, when we're trying to figure out how to live in our own way in the moment. And we have that resource available to us. Now, I'm not sure I've heard anybody describe it that way, but if you think about it for just a few minutes, it starts to make a lot of sense. Because think about how we learn to live to start with in our families. What we're learning over time is as our grandparents, our parents, our great-grandparents, as they told us those stories, what were they teaching us? Well, they were teaching us how to live. They were teaching us how to understand how we fit into the world and how to interact with the world and how to interact with other people. When my grandparents talked about growing up in the Depression, which they did a lot, it was meant as a way to help me have a value system that was different from what they saw around them in the world. It was how things had, it wasn't about how much, it was about our relationship to it, whatever it was. And it's something that's consistent scripturally. How many times do the prophets, do the Psalms say back to Israel, remember when you were slaves in Egypt and God did this and this and this. Remember what God has done. Remember that story. Use that. They weren't just saying, so just be grateful. They were saying, use that where you are right now. Use that memory to help form you and to guide your present choices. And Peter says that's a lot of what this psalm is doing. It's putting that back into them as they go into worship. We've made these promises to God. How are we living them out? Are we being obedient to what God expects from us? I also find it interesting, given that they do know this history, by the time they're singing this as a song on their way to worship, the Davidic line has been interrupted. And it was interrupted because his sons did not keep the statutes that God taught. And so there's the positive example here of David's obedience in this moment, but there's also a reminder here of the negative example of, for instance, Solomon, who as wise as he was, wasn't fully obedient to what God had. And then the good king, bad king kind of thing that starts happening out of that. And by the time we get to this moment in the life of Israel, they've already seen the failure of that. But they're hopeful for the return of it. They're hopeful in God's promise that the Davidic line would be established and that would all come again. So there's both the positive and a negative example here of how that plays out. Now, when we get back and just look at this strictly from the point of view of obedience, it begins with David's desire. David has a desire to please God. And that's where that obedience begins for David. There was no statutory requirement for him to do what he did. He does what he does because David has this desire to please God, because David has this relationship with God. You know, if you look at some of the other Psalms, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. Lord, O Lord, how majestic is your name in all the earth. The Lord is my light and my salvation, whom shall I fear? Praise the Lord, O my soul, all my inmost being, praise his holy name. Those are all Davidic Psalms. This is somebody who has this idea of this relationship with God, and we know after this occasion, right, that would be challenged. There would be a whole different set of circumstances that would come, and the pilgrims know that too, right? So, out of that desire to please God, David acts. It's what Peterson refers to as mature obedience. What's the difference between, and maybe think about examples to illustrate the difference between mature obedience and obligatory obedience? Talk about that for just a minute around your tables. What's the difference between those two, and what's an example or two that comes to mind? So what do you think? What's the difference between mature obedience and obligatory obedience?
I think mature obedience is
When you make the choice to obey.
versus
When you don't have a choice. Okay? All right? Anybody else?
What we said was obligatory would be giving 10% to the Lord, because that's what the law says.
Right?
The other side of that is giving out of your heart because you felt you had been blessed.
Okay? Yep. Yeah, I don't think the distinction is hard for us, right? Obligatory is, I think of obligatory obedience as being fear of punishment based. You know, when I had chores as a kid, and if I didn't get them done, there was a consequence for not doing whatever I was supposed to do. The law, 10%, that's the law. That's what it says. Or, this many steps on Sabbath, or that's the law. And if you transgress the law, there's punishment. That's the way it's set up. Mature obedience is obedience by choice. It's making a decision. Desire leads to decision. I want to do this, so I do this out of my own choice, out of my own will to do it. I do it in the context, in terms of Christian discipleship, I'm doing it in the context of my relationship with Christ. I want to do this. I want to live this way. And if we are then determined in that, if we say we will continue at it, we will continue to be obedient in whatever it is, we eventually come to understand that what we are doing is what's best for us. To me, the simple example is when you tell a child, don't touch the stove, it's hot. And the first version of that is a fear-based version, because it's like, Mom or Dad said don't do that, and I'll be in trouble if I do that. Whereas when they get older, they don't touch the stove because they know that's what's best for them. They know that's good for them. So obedience ultimately for us is our willingly following Christ, because we know, we trust, we believe that that's what really is best for us in the long run. And that gets us to, and that's kind of how the psalm ends, right? It gets us to this place where God sits enthroned and He blesses the community with abundant provisions, and He satisfies the poor with food, and the priests are clothed with salvation, and the faithful people sing with joy. It gets you to that place of God's abundant provision, that place where we sing with joy. Because we come to understand that God's way for us is the best way for us, and we willingly walk it. And I think this is true for a lot of folks, but I grew up in a theological culture where I think I was more afraid of God than I was in love with God for a long time. I heard a lot about, God's watching you. Well, that wasn't God's looking out for you. It was God is watching you. And to me, that's an obligatory obedience. Now, that kept me in line for the most part. Thank God for forgiveness and grace and all those wonderful things. It kept me in line, kind of. But it didn't help me grow. Just keeping the rules didn't help my faith to deepen at all. I think about it a lot with, as when you're a student, you can do the assignment. You can do the assignment, turn it in on time, have it all right. That doesn't mean you learned anything. Are we willing to engage it for our own sake to have that deeper faith? And so, Peterson says at one point, obedience is not a stodgy plodding in the ruts of religion. It is a hopeful race towards God's promises. I'm going to read that one more time. Obedience is not a stodgy plodding in the ruts of religion. It is a hopeful race towards God's promises. I've told some of you this story before, but I went to a pastor's conference years ago out at Baylor. And Dallas Willard was the main speaker. I've told Mike this story because he likes Willard too. And this was a pastor's conference. There were probably, 400 or 500 of us there. Most of them were Texans. I was just trying not to get infected with whatever that was. And but Willard opened the conference by saying, "You all spend a lot of time trying to get people to do things. Stop it." Those were his first words. And he said, it's the marker of the undiscipled church in which we live that creates this system of obligation to keep things going. And what he challenged us to do, of course, was not to just stop it and not do anything, because that would have been a very short, 3-day conference that would only happen in 5 minutes. But he went on to talk about how our role as pastors in that context, but our role in the church is to help disciple people, to help them to understand the call of Christ on their lives so that they are choosing to do those things. They're not doing them because we make people feel guilty that they need to be done. That is, I don't think the folks who are in this room tonight will be surprised to know that is a radical departure from how most churches and institutions operate. We need you to do this, so come do it. Well, nobody else is going to do it. It's really interesting. I think we have evolved over time. I think we have changed over time. You talked about the history stuff a minute ago. We've had a lot of fun reading old newsletters in the office and just seeing some of them from the early 20th century, 1910, 15, 20 in there. I mean, the guilt is so thick in those newsletters. It's like, you have a responsibility as a Christian, and it was heavy duty. I know we had a 100th anniversary when I was at 2nd Avenue in Rome, and we went back and looked at some of the church minutes there, and there was about 5 years there where every monthly business meeting involved 2 or 3 members of the church coming to ask forgiveness and readmission to the church because they had been slack in their attendance or in their giving. And they would we had copies of letters they would send out to say, we have noticed you've not been in attendance the last 3 weeks. You must appear at the next church business meeting to provide an answer for why you have not been there. I told somebody that the other day, and they said, maybe we ought to do that. I said, no, we don't have that long to be in business meeting. We'd be there all night. Yeah, we know you've been somewhere else. Okay, fine, next. But I think there has been and still is that sense that in all honesty, true confession, we lean into that when we need to. Still, somebody's got to do it. And I'm talking to you, so maybe it ought to be you. We kind of lean into that still. It's so kind of embedded. What he's suggesting here is really kind of a radically different way to think about it. Obedience is not a stodgy plodding in the ruts of religion. It is a hopeful race toward God's promises. So Peterson ends this chapter and says that what obedience gives us is the strength to stand and the willingness to leap. I like that combination. When we've learned the way of Christ by obediently following Christ, it gives us strength to stand in the moment where we are. strength to endure whatever we're dealing with at that particular point in time. But it also gives us the willingness to take the leap beyond where we are, because God calls us to do that, because of that experience, because of the memory that we share, not only ours, but generations and generations and generations before. That willingness to step out, you know, as I've heard it all my life, to step out on faith, right? That's the phrase. To step out on faith. And sometimes to jump out on faith into the unknown because of the history we have, knowing that if we follow, God takes care of us and God provides for us. One more phrase I want you to think about and talk about for just a few minutes. Peterson, in the book that some of you are reading, we're kind of using as companion for this, always has a quote from somebody else at the beginning. You know, he has an interpretation, and then there's a kind of a quote from somebody, and then he goes into. And the quote for this chapter is from Calvin. It says, "True knowledge of God is born of obedience." Sounds like Calvin. True knowledge of God is born of obedience. Take a minute and talk about, first, what that means, and secondly, what does it require? And the second answer to the second question has to be a word different than obedience. Can't answer the question with the question. So, the knowledge of God is born of obedience. Talk about that for a few minutes. What's that now?
The second part of your question.
Well, first question is, what does it mean? Second question, what does it require of us? No. This is essay. This is an essay question. But short answer, please. We don't have a lot of time left. So what do you think? What does that phrase mean? True knowledge, or that's not what the phrase is. True knowledge of God is born of obedience. What's that mean?
I think obedience comes first.
Obedience comes first. Does indicate that, does it? Is born of. So obedience comes first. What do we normally want to put first out of the words available to us in that sentence?
Why?
Why? We want the knowledge first. We want to know first, then we want to do. And he swaps it. It's in the doing that we know. So what does that require of us? To do, right?
Have a relationship with God,
Yep,
so we can learn to be obedient.
right?
Maybe childlike trust.
Childlike trust. And isn't that how we learn as children? Our parents tell us, do this, do it this way. We don't know why. We don't understand that. We don't know how that's going to come out. But we do it that way and it works, and we learn over time that's how you do that. I don't know why, it's one of those kind of random things. I don't know why, but today, for some reason, I was thinking about my dad teaching me how to tie a tie. I don't know why that is. Just what I was thinking about today. And I still remember standing in front of the mirror and doing that with him and thinking, I am never going to get this to look like that. I have no idea. And he said, okay, you cross this way, and then you take that under, and I'm just doing what he's doing. I'm mimicking what he's doing, and I'm just trying to listen and follow the instructions. And then I did it, and it looked like that. I didn't know how that happened. I don't understand the geometry of that was going to make that happen. But I still tie a tie that way. I think that's what this is. When we do what our Father teaches us to do, without understanding why it is, and you think about all those stories, again, remembering those stories, taking the data from past experience. Abram, go, Abram, I'll tell you you're there when you get there. And then later, that son I promised, the only one you have, that take him up and you're going to sacrifice him on a mountain. Noah, I want you to build a boat. Moses, go back down and tell Pharaoh to let my people go. Saul, you're going to be the apostle to the Gentiles. You're going to spread my word with the Gentiles. For every one of them, knowledge was born of obedience. And so we can take that data and apply it in our lives in all those small ways that we live each and every day, trying to figure out what to do or where to be or how to be, thinking about what is Christ, where is Christ leading in this, and be obedient to that. Thank you for being here. Yep, let's pray and we'll go. God, help us to be obedient. We know that even our obedience is empowered by your presence in our lives and your grace poured out on us. So help us. Help us to know as you lead and simply to follow. So go with us.